Living books have been the secret sauce to teaching all kinds of subjects in our homeschool. But when we first started homeschooling, I had no idea what a living book was. Over the years, I've learned to pick out those living books, the ones that will really engage my children and are written by authors that are passionate about their subject. But I wanted to invite one of the people that I've learned a lot about living books and Charlotte Mason onto the podcast today, Miss Leah Boden, the modern Miss Mason. Hi, I'm Paige Hudson, and you're listening to the Tips for Homeschool Science Show, where we're breaking down the lofty ideals of teaching science into building blocks you can use in your homeschool. Please help me welcome Miss Leah Boden, the modern Miss Mason, to the Tips for Homeschool Science Show. She's been gracious enough to agree to be our very first guest on the podcast, but she has homeschooled her 4 kiddos from across the pond in the UK. She's the wife to Dave, she's a writer, she's an author, she's a speaker extraordinaire, and she is the leading authority on how to bring Miss Charlotte Mason's work into the modern era. So Leah, thank you for agreeing to join us.
Thank you for having me, Paige. It's nice to be with you.
Not all the people who listen to the Tips for Homeschool Science show may know who Miss Charlotte Mason is. So can you tell us, who was Charlotte Mason?
Yes, I would love to introduce her to your listeners if they haven't heard who she is. So Charlotte Mason died 100 years ago. We've just marked her centenary, actually, in January. And she was a revolutionary educator, British educator at the turn of the 20th century. She really saw the disparity between, the class system and education, how children were educated within the kind of upper and lower classes and what it looked like in Victorian Britain. So children were seen and not heard. If they were from a lower class, they would have kind of gone through the basics of some education, but then very early on in life, brought into a trade, family business, a factory work, maybe something. And if children had better resources, if their family had wealth, there would be governesses and higher education and other opportunities. And through her life being a teacher, from being in her teen years, she was training to be a teacher. She began to see and really feel in the classroom, this isn't right. You know, children need to have this holistic experience, no matter what their background is, that there should be an education for all. And she talked about, she used the term, a liberal education, not in a political sense, but in a wide and varied sense. And so she began to observe and pick up on this was going on in the country. And as she really wasn't until she was in her kind of mid-40s, began to write about it and talk about it. And she gave a series of lectures, which then became Home Education, which is the first book that we know of in the series. I mean, Paige, you can see behind me on this video, I've got these little pink books behind me. They're the 6 books, they're these volumes of books. So she then really, in the second half of her life, became this incredible advocate for children, a spokesperson for this living education that we understand today, and kind of offered this alternative approach to childhood and education, which in turn impacted motherhood as well, because mothers were learning to come alongside their children in their education. So quite brilliant, really, and quite brilliant that we're still talking about it today.
Yeah, for sure. So if you could take one thing, what would you say is the single most important idea from her educational philosophy?
I would say that the primary one for me would be her first principle, which was children are born persons. And it sounds like a funny way of saying it nowadays, but they're basically, she had this understanding, this foundational understanding that children come into the world whole and with personalities and ready to be able to connect and contribute to the world. And often there was a kind of a narrative around childhood going, round, which some people still believe today, that children are like a vessel to be filled. We know they're empty and we get to fill them, or they're like a lump of clay that we get to mold and shape. And what Charlotte Mason was saying was actually they are made in the image of God. They're whole. They come ready into the world. So whether we receive a child through adoption, through birth, when you're holding that child, they are able to connect and contribute to the world. And that then really sets the tone for education. Now, so this is where things like living books, introducing them to nature outdoors, this kind of foundations of scientific discovery, all these things are not shoving ideas in their head, but we're introducing children to an incredible world of literature, science, discovery, creativity, and we get to immerse them in it and then say, hey, what do you think? What have you seen? What have you heard? And it's very much an inside out approach to education, whereas traditional education spoon feeds. A Charlotte Mason education asks of the child, hey, why don't you contribute to this and tell me what you see? It's so wonderful and it's so liberating.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. Rather than spoon feeding them stuff, we're actually wanting them to take part and have an input in their education, which really, in my opinion, sets them up for future learning, to have this idea of learning for life, not just for the 12 years or whatever, however many years they're in the school system. So that's one of the reasons I like Charlotte Mason. I'm glad you brought that up. So with her educational philosophy as a backdrop, how would you define a living book?
Yeah, great question. It's often one of those things that I think people think, well, okay, I'm starting to understand the philosophy, but where do I start to find these resources? So she used the term living in a very scientific way. It was a very organic word, which is basically there's a giving and taking from the resource. So it's not just books. She talked about living books and things. So we could add experiments into that. We can add creativity into that. It's fantastic. But if you're looking for books to use to introduce subjects and ideas to our children, we're really looking for something that doesn't look like a textbook. And that is a really easy way to start. Textbooks have their place. And she often, later as children got older with things like grammar and things like that, she would often use them. It's not, I think it's a bit of a myth that she never picked them up. But when you're looking for living books, that's the first kind of an easy thing to look for is the, is this a book that is full of coloured pictures that gives lists of facts and information? Okay, this is not a living book. And it's good to be able to cancel those out first. And what you're looking for is a book that has generally one passionate author. So you read the first couple of pages and you are caught up in the story, in the narrative of whatever they're trying to teach. And I always say to people, do a 1-2 page test. If you happen to be in a bookshop or a library, it's a bit different because we shop often online, don't we, for books nowadays? But you read that 1-2 page, read the first couple of pages. And even online, you can often dip into the books now and you can read a bit. And does it grip you? Does it make you want to read on? One of the things that I think is important is if you read a couple of paragraphs, could you put the book down and tell somebody else what you'd read? Not parrot fashion, but could you reiterate the essence of what you've just read? This is very much, then working with narration, which is another one of Charlotte Mason's methods. And so those things are some of the great tools. And nowadays, I think it's important to be looking at, can your children find themselves in the story, or can we see other cultures and a window into other people's lives? Not every book will have that, but it's a really good question in the 21st century to be asking of the books that we're using for our children. And so these are some of the ideas. And Charlotte Mason said we need to learn to discern what a living book is. So, she had programs, but really what she wanted us to do was you figure it out. You find out what brings life to your home. What books do your children fall in love with? What are they able to talk about afterwards? These are really keys to understanding what a living book is. And living books can be found about and they can cover science, literature, geography, history, the arts. I mean, you can find them about everything, and it's incredible. And it's one of those things like once you tap into it, you start to recognize them everywhere. So it took me a few years. I relied on other people's lists for a while, but that didn't always work for me. Sometimes I'd get a book off a list and and it just didn't work for my children. And this is when I began to think, okay, I need to learn this. I need to gain this skill myself so that I can start to look for the books. So yeah, that's kind of the beginnings, really.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's fantastic about all the stuff that you put out, the website, your book, your podcast, is you really encourage us as educators to seek that out for ourselves, to determine what that is for our family, and that it's not just this prescribed set of criteria, but to look for what will work for your children and your family, because it's unique. As homeschoolers, we're all very unique, which is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great thing. It's something to be celebrated. Yeah.
I was going to ask you tips to help us pick living books, but you gave those to us, didn't you? Look for authors that are passionate about what they're saying. No, that's fantastic. That's great.
Yes.
So, and look for things that interest us. And I love your idea of that, read it a little bit, read a few pages and see what you think and see if it interests you.
Yeah.
Because if it's not grabbing you right away, it's most likely not going to grab your children's attention either. And I find too, when I'm passionate about a book, then that translates to my children, it's a lot easier.
Absolutely.
If I don't like a book.
If you're, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're bored and you're kind of like dreading picking it up, then the children are going to feel that even more. So it's a very good sign that it's probably one you should put away. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a certain series, I won't name it because people will probably crucify me for not liking it, but there's a certain series that everybody's like, oh, you have to
we all want to know now.
No, yeah, everybody wants to know. I'm not telling you. And I can't stand the books. And so we've never read them aloud. Yeah. I'm sorry, my kids are missing out on that, but what do you do?
Yeah, we've had the same. We've tried books that everybody else has raved about, and there's I'm not much of a bandwagon kind of person anyway. I don't jump on things quickly, but there's been a series or two that other people everybody else's kids seem to love it, and mine just don't. They have not enjoyed it, and I think, well, we just should celebrate our uniqueness. It's fine. Yeah. I don't love all the same books that my friends love, so There we go.
That's why there's so many wonderful books out there. When you guys read these living books, how do you discuss them with your children? Because you mentioned narration being one of the hallmarks of Charlotte Mason's philosophy. So how do you guys go about discussing a living book? Do you do it as you're reading? Do you finish, once you finish the book, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, so narration is one of was and is one of the main tools really for a Charlotte Mason education. It's a method that ties everything together and makes everything work, and takes some practice and some understanding, but it's worth giving the time to. And for me, it's one of the most powerful parts of the Charlotte Mason philosophy. And so it's just really what it is in simplicity is telling back what you have heard, seen, read, listened to, whatever. So it isn't just about the books. It can be looking at a piece of art, listening to a piece of music, and then as you step away, can you retell that experience to somebody else? Can you describe it? Can you explain it? And what happens in the retelling is that you and the child forms a relationship with the knowledge. And not everything is remembered, but some of that, as you begin to retell it, we all know, a lot of us know that when you teach something, you learn it more than ever you ever can. It goes deeper. So the more, for me, for years and years and years, I've been teaching these elements of the Charlotte Mason philosophy, and I could talk about it in my sleep now, just because I'm telling people about it. And so you imagine that same process with your child. So they read, you read, depending on the age of the child, this looks different. So with young children from about the age of 6, you'll read a small paragraph to them, and or a short page of a book, and then you'll put the book down and say, okay, let's talk about what that the classic thing is to say, tell me back what I just read. I never really stuck to things like that or even used the word narration. I think it has to be natural. So I'm like, all right, let's talk about this, and you open the floor for discussion and for them telling you, well, I loved it when this happened, and then the character did this, and then they found this new land, and and they just start talking. And what can happen then is that it just becomes normal that you talk about things after a reading. Now, once you've introduced it to the child at a young age, you've got the beauty of it growing with them, and the method grows with them. So you can add the more formal element to it then as the child gets older. So you might read a history book. Some little tips for that is if you've got dates or places that are difficult to pronounce, then I've just got like a whiteboard, wipe clean board, or something like, or even a piece of paper, and you just jot down those things on a piece of paper. So this is the year and this is the spelling of this name, because what happens, the brain concentrates so hard on trying to remember that date that you just don't listen to everything else. So you're kind of eliminating some of those barriers for them by writing some of that information down. You'll read the text, you'll read the history story or whatever it is you're reading. And then again, hey, let's talk about this. What happened to Richard III or whatever? And you start to talk about it with these little prompts that you've got. And it just helps them. You're not trying to trip them up or you're not trying to help them fail, watching for what they don't know. You're excited about what they do know and what they have heard. And then as they get older, they can then turn those oral narrations into written narrations. So they start to write those things down. And then as they get into their teen years, they can start to form compositions from those. So there's this beautiful gradual progression of depth and richness of learning that comes from this very simple method. And as I say, you can apply it to anything. And also just to throw in as well, you can get creative with this. So if children are quite young, they might build Lego reenactments of something. They may act it out. They might draw a picture of a history thing they've just, read about. So get creative with it. Do whatever you think will bring this learning to life for your children.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. It's more about bringing it to life for them rather than you checking off a box. I tend to be very analytical. Little check boxes make me just really happy. And so for me, like the introduction into Charlotte Mason and bringing it into this world has really helped me just kind of relax that side of me and be more about enjoying the experience and bringing that richness to our children's education. And so I 100% agree with the progression too. I don't know if your kids have all been the same, but they both went through that progression differently, So one of them was ready to write pretty soon. The other one still doesn't like to write. And that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty
All
of
mine have been
homeschooling.
quite different.
Yeah. Allows us to do that.
You just,
So,
all mine have been very, very different, and they've all had different approaches over the years and different responses to it. Some were just not ready. I mean, if ever there's tears over written narrations, I'm like, pause. You're not ready for this.
Right.
With one child, I waited a whole year before I approached it again. They were just in tears over trying to do these written narrations. I just stopped it altogether, took it off the table, just said, like, okay, we're not going to do this. We kept on with the oral narrations. And really what I learned there was, it's best not to tackle written narrations until your child is fluent and fluid with their oral narrations. That's a really good telltale sign. But even with this particular child, it was the translating it from the head and speaking it out into paper, which needed some more work. And so we waited a whole year, revisited it. And by then they were just writing reams and reams and reams. Couldn't stop them. So timing is everything. And I think being kind to the child and to the whole family around this is, take off the pressure. Don't push through. Just pause and then persevere with them as a person rather than the task. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that is really good. So do you and your family, have you enjoyed any specific living books for science? Since this is the Tips for Homeschool Science show, so do you have any recommendations that you have?
Yeah, I mean, the foundation of scientific study within the Charlotte Mason philosophy is nature study, and which I think is great because we've built upon
Definitely.
that over the years. And as they got older, we introduced more scientific discovery and experiments. We started to go into like more physics and chemistry, but I love those beginnings. I love the idea of them exploring nature and them learning observation skills, reporting skills, recording skills. And so some of the books that I've absolutely loved with at that stage I'm looking to my right because I should have had them next to me, Paige. I'm so sorry I failed you, but they really were. Some of those were nature sort of themed books, and more of those kind of biological plant biology and those, but made in a really lovely way, very much about observational skills, recording, a little bit of kind of looking at the inside of leaves and flowers, but also very seasonal. So they were really fantastic. I love books like that. I've always had loads of field guides. I mean, I always saw those as quite science books for me as well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But as the kids have got older, and we've discovered different things. I'm just looking at a couple of books now. We've got a book called The Disappearing Spoon, which is a very much for older kids.
Yes.
Which is about the periodic table of elements. So that was quite an interesting one. There's another one called The Joy of Chemistry, which again is jumping back into those older years. You probably know that one.
Yeah. Yeah, some of those older books they're fun to look at when you go back
Yeah.
and see how many advances there's been in chemistry since then. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some of our practical, we discovered some kind of really practical hands-on experiment books by, I think she's an American author, a lady. I'm trying to remember what her name was now. But she had these books where they were just very simply like explaining an experiment and kind of putting the power into the children's hands to do that discovery. We used a lot of those. And we would do, in fact, for a little while. Yeah, what's her name?
Janice Van Cleve.
Yes, that's them.
And she has one for each
That's
one.
her.
Yeah.
They're the ones.
Yep, love those.
Yeah, that's the ones. Well done, Paige. I'm looking to my left because I've got a science section on my shelf, but my eyes aren't that good. So
Yeah, I know. The older you get, the eyes go. Mine do.
and I'm wearing contacts as well. Terrible. So yeah, we found those really helpful because she really just empowers the child, doesn't she? And the person who's doing it to do that experiment. Sure. And we use a lot of those. So for a whole year, we gathered with 4 or 5 families to do science experiments together, and that was fun. And then the other thing we did was we explored the periodic table of elements together, and the kids would take away one of the elements every week and they would study it at home, and then the next week they would do like a mini presentation, like a narration, and then the kids would all hear from each other. So we've tried so many fun things with science, but it's great, and it just kind of then opens up. Then my eldest daughter went on to do all sciences, in fact,
really?
In 6th form before she graduated. Yeah, she did all sciences, which is amazing, really, because you just think, wow, all we did really was introduce many aspects of it, and she took that even further. So you never know where your children are going to take it.
Yeah, I think there's this kind of fallacy in the ideas that nature study is not enough for science. But really, if you look back in history, that's how science began, was with nature study. You know, people asking and seeing things in nature and wondering why this is happening. So I think nature study can be a wonderful base for the beginning of science education. It's really great. But
it is great. I love the questions that John Muir's Law.
Yeah.
Is it John Muir?
John
That's
Muir.
how you say his name. John. I love the questions that he asks. He talks about it reminds me of. I'll have to find it in my book. I did write them in the book. I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. And those questions, that's how science begins, isn't it?
Right.
Anything really, like, why does this happen?
Sure.
How does this work?
Yeah.
This reminds me of, and I love all that. Yeah.
instilling that in our kids is really super important to get them to wonder, to notice things. That's how we create future scientists. So, yeah, I've definitely. But tell me about this, your book. I have been slowly savoring it. I love the butterfly on the front, by the way. Awesome cover. But I've been slowly savoring a chapter at a time. Even this, I've been homeschooling for, I don't know, 20 plus years now. And
Yeah.
even I'm picking up things in it. It's wonderful. Very encouraging book. I love how you say connection over curriculum. That's been a big feeling of mine from the beginning too. That idea that we've got to emphasize our connection with our kids over the to-do box or the curriculum or whatever we're doing. But yeah, so tell us a little bit more about how your book came about and where people can get it and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the book is available now everywhere you can buy books from. It should be anyway. Definitely in the US and North America, it's widely available there. And the book came about really after many years of my me home educating and being a student myself of Charlotte Mason's work and a practitioner of her methods. And I think after years of doing this and then starting to share, doing workshops, speaking at conferences, starting the podcast, all these kind of things that I started to do, that I was recognizing patterns of response and patterns of what people were saying. This is so helpful to me. This is so life-giving. So even the phrase that I'll often say about finding your freedom within the philosophy, I think I hadn't realized how many barriers there were. People were creating these like sticking points of, feeling like I should do this or I must do this and this has to be right. And the whole tick box kind of, if I get all these things done, I'm doing it right. And there's nothing wrong with ticking things off lists. I like a list. But it's the feeling of feeling constrained by something rather than it being life-giving was what I was discovering. And so after many years of kind of, it's almost like data, you start doing coaching and doing workshops and all this kind of stuff. You recognize these patterns in people's lives and in people's homeschools that I just thought, what, we need to bring something needs to be published in the, now that will help change this way of thinking around this philosophy. And because there are 6 books that you can read of Charlotte Mason's work, but some people will home educate and they will never read these books. They just won't. That's just not going to be something they do. But they might pick up this when they pop into Barnes and Noble or whatever. They might go, oh, I want to read that. And so I think it's good to have both. Right. To have something available. And so I had beautiful, well-meaning people saying, you should be writing, you should write. And so after a while, the right connections just suddenly happened at the right time for me to be able to get a literary agent, which was amazing. And then the ball starts rolling of this idea of this book. And all it takes is one publisher to say, we want to get behind this, and that was, it was just really exciting to be able to actually put this out into the world. And the encouraging thing, Paige, is that similar to you, I've had many other fellow kind of veteran home educators who have been saying, they read it because they were kind of curious about it, but not reading it thinking it would be helpful to them or have anything particularly for them. And what they're finding is, you put it in a different way, or there's a refreshing element about this. So especially there's a whole third of the book is on motherhood. And that is quite unique for a Charlotte Mason book. I know we've got books on mother culture, but she wasn't a mother. So often people, you don't go to Charlotte Mason to learn about motherhood, but there was something she had to say about the ones who were taking the responsibility of the child's education. Hey, you need to be continuously learning as well. And so it's those aspects that have really kept it alive for me. And I wanted to put that in the book as well. So it's got 3 sections: childhood, motherhood, and education. Obviously, it's still not so much scratching the surface, but there's just an element that I was able to bring into whatever it is, 200 pages. But I tried as much as possible to listen to those I've been working with, to listen to those I've been coaching, to listen to the wider community, and to bring, to offer a book that maybe would help this next generation of home educators and refresh those of us who have been here for a while.
For sure. I think that's exactly what it does. Great job. Well done.
Thank you.
Where can
Thank
people
you.
find you online?
Yeah, I'm very easy to find. Where shall we send them? If they type Modern Miss Mason into a search engine, anything that it comes up with will be me. So because the book's called that, but my Instagram handle's called that, my website, so leahboden.com and modernmissmason.com both kind of end up in the same place. So if they just pop Modern Miss Mason in, and you'll be able to find me. And I've got a Facebook page, all that kind of stuff, but I'm mostly hanging out on Instagram. That's where I put fresh content up weekly. And obviously, the website's got everything on there. I do a membership called The Collective. So that's up and running as of this year. That's going great. So people can come over and find me and come and join in with what we're doing.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the Tips for Homeschool Science show. And I know that people will have gotten lots of nuggets of wisdom from our conversation. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Season 10 of the Tips for Homeschool Science show, which is sponsored by our company, Elemental Science. At Elemental Science, we have several series of award-winning programs, including a series with living books to help you teach science. Sassafras Science Adventures will help you enjoy a journey as you learn about science. The newest installment of the Sassafras Science series is coming out in April of 2023. This volume will be a journey through the periodic table. It's all about chemistry, which is my personal favorite subject. Head over to elementalscience.com to learn more about the Sassafras Science Adventures and see how we can help you teach science at home.